Well, those of you who've been here before know that my normal role is to give a nice academic, clean, slide-driven presentation. As we were planning this year, we thought maybe that wouldn't work, and it certainly wouldn't. So we're doing something a little different. It's different for me. If you haven't been here before, you won't notice, but if you have, you may. And we thought that some of you might be feeling a little bit of what I thought I'd be feeling at this point, which is we've heard a lot of stories. They make us feel, they make us think, what do we do with all of this? How do we put it together and pick ourselves up and move forward from here? And so with a lot of humility and a lot of anxiety, I'm going to, since I'm holding up your food for your stomach, give you, I hope, some food for thought as we go into lunch, and please bear with me, I have more than a few things to say, but to try to help us go from where we've been to where we can go from here. And I've been taking a lot of notes and listening over the last day and a half, and there always has to be a theme, and my theme is 10 S's. I've come up with 10 S's to talk about. The first is struggle. We've heard a lot about struggle. Struggles are real. They are personal. They have nuance. They cannot be shared quickly. They cannot be understood quickly. We've heard phrases like we're all human. Good people make bad decisions. Bad things happen to good people. And we need to acknowledge that despite the unprecedented wealth and the extended lifespan of our era, struggle is real. It has meaning. We have to hear it, embrace its reality if we're going to be serious about our goal of achieving equity or improvement in behavioral health. My second S is stigma. I joined you in applauding for Dana when she told us she'd gone 2 years without taking any substances. And I think if she had stood up and said she'd had a cancer diagnosis 2 years ago and she was standing there telling you that her body was clean of cancer, we would have given her applause as well. But I try to imagine a slightly different scenario. I'd like to imagine two people who, instead of telling a success story, we were reading their obituaries 6 months after a cancer diagnosis or 6 months after a substance use disorder diagnosis. And I think about the words we would have heard. Someone succumbed to cancer. The cancer was aggressive. They fought it. They were brave. They were bold. But the cancer was too strong and it beat them. But if it was substance use, we would have talked about relapse. The person relapsed. The person couldn't stick with the regimen. The person was not strong enough to defeat the disorder. We would have talked about the personal failure, not the strength of the disease. And that's part of what the stigma is. When we beat disease, we don't experience the stigma because we're celebrating the human spirit. But when the disease wins, as it so often does, it's the stigma that divides our telling a story of human failure as opposed to human frailty. And that brings me to my third S, which is the S of silence, so closely related, of course, to stigma. Think of the slogan of the AIDS movement, silence equals death. It's struggle and stigma that leads to silence because people are in themselves afraid to speak, and then they don't speak. And what have we learned? Silence does not mean everything is okay. And silence doesn't mean we agree and we assent. And we need to rethink how we interpret silence as we experience it and as we hear it or hear its silence from those around us. My fourth S is a little bit more my traditional style, forgive me, and that's the word systems. We're talking about equity in behavioral health. We've covered a broad range of topics, and each of those topics brings in different systems, and they require different responses. And I think if we're trying to make sense of where we are and what we need to do, we need to remember that there's therapy, private therapy, as many have discussed. There's the institutes, the state institutes that have, and the deinstitutionalization movement for people who've had very significant behavioral health conditions. We have the community mental health system. We have addiction treatment, which is often in church basements or as an informal system. We have interactions with police. We have interactions with the corrections system. And these systems play very different roles if we're talking about substance use disorder or severe depression or bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. And so when we say equity in behavioral health, we need to be precise. We need to understand the systems that the people with various behavioral health conditions interact with and how they do or don't help us achieve equity. And I have to say, because it was said in my introduction, I was the first director of the Department of Healthcare Policy and Finance when it was created in 1994. And I didn't hear a lot of Medicaid over the last day and a half. And yet Medicaid, I'm not saying I heard none, and there were some oblique references. You have to really know Medicaid to know that they were talking about Medicaid. But Medicaid is the foundation of the financing and the organization of behavioral health care in this state as in others. And the fact that Colorado expanded Medicaid is a critical element in the panoply of policies that you've adopted that give you some basis for addressing these issues. So don't forget Medicaid when you're thinking about systems. And that leads me to my fifth S, which is solutions. I'd like to spend more time here, but the growling of your stomachs is audible from the stage. So I'll just quickly give you a few of my observations about solutions. The first is, this is complicated, but I'm going to try to say it. Solving a 15% problem is really different from solving a 75% problem. What do I mean by that? I'll use one example of a 15% problem. Reducing or eliminating the number of people without health insurance. We have a lot of gaps in healthcare coverage in this country. We adopted the Affordable Care Act. We implemented it, brings down the number of people without health insurance. We're trying to fill in the gaps with Medicaid, with exchange coverage. There's still a lot of people left out. How do we address affordability? There's a lot, and we're continuing to incrementally try to improve our policies to fix this problem. But I regret to tell you that when it comes to behavioral health, we're more like at a 75% problem. The unmet need is profound. The undiagnosed unmet need is profound. The capacity limitations are profound. The lack of payment methods are profound. We cannot incrementally get our way from where we are to the behavioral health system that we need. And it requires a different kind of thinking and a different kind of policy approach. And it's not one that our political process does happily or easily, because we like things that are incremental. We like moving around the edges and not disrupting too much, because we've all built our lives and our comfort around what we have. But incrementalism is not enough for the challenges we face. And one of the things that I heard yesterday and today was stories of heroism. And heroism is wonderful, but heroism is not a systemic response to a problem. And we need to not rely on heroism to solve the problems that we have and the challenges that we face. But there is good news. We have lots of intervention points, and we need to look at them for our solutions. Again, I'm condensing this down a little shorter than I would like. let me give you an example. When we think about immunizing children, we have a touch point when they all enter school. And that's when we can require it because you can't get in school unless you've been immunized. When in one of my old jobs, we were trying to improve early identification of developmental delays, one of the things we realized was there's no universal touch point for kids until they enter school. They're in various informal and formal childcare settings, but there's nothing universal. When we think about behavioral health, we don't have universal touch points. We have people entering the criminal justice system. We have people entering the medical system. We have them entering the mental health system. They're usually at those entry points late in the progression of the problem because we don't have early intervention systems. And so if we're thinking about solutions, we have to think, first of all, how do we make the best possible use of those intervention points? But also, how do we try to make the intervention points earlier so that we're not waiting so late in crisis? And the other comment about solutions is that we have to be careful we don't over-rely on systems that are built for other purposes. We heard a very telling story about the limitations of the courts in their ability to even assess a family's circumstances. I think about all of the effort, and it's a tremendous effort that's gone into building systems to respond to the opioid epidemic. But we need to make sure that those systems aren't just treating and creating new silos of care. The behavior, the range of conditions and circumstances associated with behavioral health is so broad that if we just create a bunch of new silos, condition by condition, we're not doing anyone any favors. My overall observation around solutions is that in healthcare, we have a pretty robust language around behavioral health, and we have a pretty robust language around equity, but we don't have much of a language around behavioral health equity. We haven't quite figured out how to bring those together. And I'd say that's fairly common. There are a lot of places in healthcare where we can have an equity conversation, we can have a substantive conversation about the topic, but we find it hard to bring the two together. My sixth S is the S of social justice. Others have said this, and they've said it better, and they've said it more completely. But I think we have to look ourselves in the eyes and think about the social response to the opioid epidemic and acknowledge that part of the reason this country has been willing to muster the political will to put resources, dollars, and change systems and try to reduce stigma around opioid use disorder is because of the people affected. That the people affected are white, and they look more like the policymakers than the people who have historically borne the burden of unmet need and untreated behavioral health and substance use disorders, whether it's the Native American communities, whether it's non-white communities, particularly African Americans, Latinos, Latinas. Those communities, these challenges are not new, but our willingness to address them is new because of who's affected. And if we are unwilling to acknowledge the social justice challenge we face, if we're trying to achieve equity, we're not being honest with ourselves. There are tremendous disparities in access to services. You've heard them on the stage here today. There are those of us who can afford private therapy. There's those of us who can afford multi-five-digit investments in rehabilitation, and there are many, many, many who cannot. And one topic I have not heard that I have to throw out on the social justice list is the over-reliance on medication for those who do not have access to therapies. And the burden we place, particularly on children, particularly children of color, when we are unwilling to invest in the true systems that will address their needs, but we need to control them, we need to sedate them, and we medicate them. And this is it's a horrible story. And if we don't consider that as part of our equity challenge, I think we're losing sight of so much that we need to watch. My seventh S is the S that's been the basis of today. It's the S of stories. My journal is a scholarly journal. We reach an elite audience, an academic audience. We have an element called Narrative Matters. Every issue has a first-person story. It's the most read piece in the journal every month. We make sure that every Narrative Matters piece doesn't just tell a story, but ties to policy, to the policy issues that are relevant to the story being told. It's hard to do. It's very hard to move from stories to policy. And that's part of why we thought maybe taking a little breather from the stories would be valuable. But I would remind you that stories, as powerful as they are, can be used for multiple purposes. And one of the challenges for those of us who work in an empirical world, an evidence-based world, is that the power of stories can be for good or for ill. I can't help but comment on the use of stories of people who are in this country illegally, who commit a crime, or who have and some American citizen is harmed by that crime. And that story is then used to justify wholesale policies to exclude huge numbers of people desperate for a better life in this country. I could go on, but it sounds like I don't have to. The point is, stories are powerful, but they do not always tell the whole story. And so we need to be thoughtful about the use of stories. We need to ask the question, who gets to tell them? Not everyone has the resources to come to the seat of power and tell the story. They are powerful, and you've been told yesterday and today how important it is, but then we have to ask, how do we make sure that those stories that need to be told are told, and who listens to the stories? Because ultimately, it's the people in the seats of power who either will or will not respond. They will or will not find resonance in the stories told. And it takes me back to the social justice element. There are some stories that it's hard to hear. There are some stories that people don't want to hear. And unless we make sure that the people in the chairs that are supposed to listen to the stories are reflective of the needs that we have for response from the stories, we can tell stories all day long and nothing will happen. My eighth S, I promise there are only 10. Stability. I was really struck by this. We have heard some incredibly powerful stories, but they come after the fact. When you are in crisis, you are not in a position to tell a story. You are trying to cope with your crisis. And so we need to help. If we want the power of stories in our dialogue, we need to help stabilize and offer supports to people to get through crisis and to reflect and to learn and to listen and to make sense of what they've been through, and to use that as the platform for storytelling. If we ask people in the midst of crisis to tell a story, we're probably harming their own ability to get through their crisis, and we're also likely to draw the wrong conclusions, because it's only upon reflection that you can make sense. My ninth S is cycles. I know, cycles doesn't start with an S. I'm an editor, I know these things, but, you know, it sounds good. We have heard so much about trauma as the origin of so many of the challenges people face in their lives. It has been perilous to talk about cycles. the politics of blaming the victim, blaming family pathology. There have been a lot of bad uses of the sense of cyclicality around trauma, but we have new evidence. We have lots of new learning. The whole study of ACEs, adverse childhood events, and you heard it in story after story yesterday and today. These cycles are related to families. Families can pass on trauma, and families can break cycles of trauma. And we need to acknowledge both of those realities. If we ignore the possibility that families will perpetuate cycles of trauma, we will not ever make progress. But if we ignore the potential strength of families in breaking cycles of trauma and hold up and support families in their efforts to do so, we are squandering the best resource we have to break those cycles. And so we need to understand the origins and the cycles and learn how to break them. And so I close with my 10th S. It's the S of strength. Now, yesterday, someone said everyone in Boulder has a therapist. We chuckled. I chuckled, at least. That therapist is there as a source of strength because I go back to my first S, which is the S of struggle. We all have struggle. We may face it differently. The depth of it is certainly highly variable. But it is having support and strength that makes it possible to support others. And so that sense of the ability to bring into our lives the therapy and the support we need to be strong is real. Yesterday, I got dragged against my will to the yoga session. It was so terrible, I'm going to go back again today. It's a source of strength. We started this morning by standing and building up our strength, and yesterday starting by reflecting on our intentions to give us sources of strength. How rare is it for us to call upon ourselves to slow down and ask, what can we do to give ourselves strength? And we heard yesterday, a little bit today, but it came through loud and clear for me yesterday, one of the great sources of strength is success. Success builds strength, one person at a time, one policy at a time, one battle at a time, celebrating the victories. When you have a 75% problem, you can't wait until you solve it to celebrate. You have to celebrate along the way. Every success, set realistic goals, acknowledge the challenges you face, celebrate the success one person and one issue at a time. And as I send you off to the real lunch, to the real sustenance, telling you to be back at 12:30, thankfully they're boxed lunches so you'll have time to eat. Please, during that break, take advantage of the final source of strength, the most important source of strength. It's so obvious, I don't have to say it. It's the strength you have in each other. Thank you very much.